So we went ahead and we've read through President John F. Kennedy's Bay of Pigs invasion speech. And like it says below, okay, we went ahead and this was during the Cold War Cuban Missile Crisis between the United States and Cuba. And during this time, it was a failed attempt by the US to be backed by Cuban exiles to overthrow the government of Fidel Castro. So, as we read this speech, we went ahead and we looked for what the United States was really trying to claim so that we can go ahead and fill in our graphic organizer, okay, for our argumentative writing. So, we went ahead and you made sure to click on each of these hyperlinked words that you could understand what it was saying. We know that this first half is really just telling us that there are people who are fighting for their freedom against the dictator, but it hasn't improved on the island of Cuba. Even though the United States expresses concerns with this and we're not happy with it, we're also not going to invade because it would break our understanding and our we would lose face with the other communities that we'd be doing this. However, if anyone either in the United States or allies or friends of the United States breaks these obligations, the government will not hesitate to protect the United States. During this, we also want to identify the strong language being used. We've talked heavily about connotation and denotation, denotation being the dictionary definition, and connotation being the emotional aspect that you apply with a word. Now we have unhappy island, contest for freedom, struggle, sympathies, intervene, restraint, will not hesitate. All of these different pieces from that first section really help to emphasize and show how passionate President Kennedy is about this subject and about what he's talking about. Remember, in argumentative writing, your purpose is to gain the understanding or gain the side of the person or your audience. As we go ahead and move forward, we know that these next couple of paragraphs are really just saying that we will see again this type of government and that will be trying to quiet the people who are fighting for this freedom. And then it goes into more about who Fidel Castro is. He said that he had mercenaries or soldiers for hire. And when he was asked if he wanted to leave the island, he said, I will never leave the country, which Kennedy replies with, this is not a reply of a mercenary, someone who's just been hired, but instead, it's someone who clearly has other intentions. And so we know that even though Cuba must not be left to communists, and the United States does not plan to do this. So even though this happened, the United States doesn't plan to see this continue to happen. And with that, we know that in order for Castro to gain support on his side, he went ahead and spun it to the Cubans and his supporters how the United States has all this hatred, they wanted to do all this, but Kennedy is arguing that the United States is not going to allow them to do this. And even though this attempt was failed, we can still heavily learn from this. So again, we have our strong language, rebel commander. Rebel, obviously, if you guys are into Star Wars, you know the rebel forces, the people who are trying to do the bad things or not follow what everyone else is doing. His quote, not a reply of a mercenary. It's telling you exactly what would be expected of this person and showing us that this isn't what would happen. We also have abandoned and sobering. Abandoned, you're left out there without anyone to help you. Sobering, it's very surreal. It's very realistic for people to see this. And then we go ahead and get into our first, seconds, and thirds, which basically just go ahead and say they're lessons that we've learned, and because of these lessons, we're going to be more prepared. We've learned about communism. We learned that we shouldn't underestimate it. We learned that it prevents growth. We learned that it can lead to war and that it will lead to war. And again, those strong different languages being used: mass terror, fanatic tyrant, irony, discipline, menace, our survival, freedom, and flourish, relentless struggle, and vulnerable. And then in the closing, we know that Kennedy is saying how this is something that we've learned from. And even though we didn't accomplish what we wanted to at this time, we're still going to try and be successful. in a different way than what it was. Okay, we're going to go ahead and ensure that the United States will flourish and will be resourceful and excellent. And it doesn't matter the cost for him at this point. We have security, maybe lost, intensify our efforts, bitter struggle, and regardless for that strong language being used for the argument. So now what we're going to do, we know that after reading, we have an idea of what was being said and why it was being said. We want to ask ourselves those 5 questions. Who's talking? President Kennedy. What is he talking about? He's talking about the invasion, how it wasn't successful. Why? To include the American people. Okay, and those are just some of it. Now remember your other big questions. Does President Kennedy have something to gain from explaining this to the American people? Well, yes, he does. He has their understanding that he can gain from them and what he would want to show them so that the people trust him. In this, the one big claim that we can really pull away from this and his stance on this invasion was that, yes, it was necessary because we learned that communism was bad. We truly saw that it was bad and that it was not something that we could truly get behind. So over here on our graphic organizer, we went ahead and we put down there are many things that the United States can learn from this engagement with Cuba, and the largest thing is that communism is bad. So here, right here, we're making a claim that communism is bad, and that's what President Kennedy was arguing in his speech to the American people. Then what we're going to do, we're going to find the reasoning that President Kennedy has given to support this stance. Now remember, you have your bronze, silver, and gold claims. Bronze is going to be your weakest, okay? Because you talk about it first. It's really not something that you're going to go into that much detail about, but you still need sufficient detail with. Your second claim is your silver, your second strongest. You want to really emphasize that, hey, this is truly how I feel about it, and it's true that this is what it is. And then you have your gold claim, your third one, right? You present it at the end because it's the best. It's what everyone wants to hear, and it's what you can really drive home with. Now, these ideas are presented when President Kennedy is giving his claims of first, second, and third. Okay, those are the 3 things that he's claiming happens. So, first of all, we know that communism should not be underestimated. Okay, we see this in the text when Castro is stating that he has no plans to leave the islands after claiming mercenaries were hired. Right there, we underestimated Castro because we believed that he was true with what he said. We believed that he was truly just there to help, but instead he wasn't. Okay, we also know that he commanded the police to inflict these mass terrors and prevent the spreads of freedom. All right here, okay? Mass terrors, arrest people, prevent the distance. So with that, we know that, again, communism should not be underestimated. We underestimated it because we didn't expect this person to go ahead and do these different things. We didn't expect them to use the police against their own people to inflict these terrors. So we, as the United States, underestimated this. And those claims can again be pulled out in your text. Then for our silver claim, we're claiming that communism will prevent the entire hemisphere from growth. We have 2 paragraphs that are really dedicated to this, where it says, secondly, all the way down here, okay? And from that, we know that together we must build a hemisphere where freedom can flourish and where a free nation under outside attack of any kind can be assured that all our resources stand ready to respond to any request for assistance. So right there, we need to come together. We need to unite so that we can truly grow. If we're separated like this, because we are right now because of communism in Cuba, we know that it's not going to be this hemisphere of unity and success and aid when people need it. The other claim that Kennedy gives for this to support that with communism and separation will not allow us to be strong is that only the strong, only the industrious, only the determined, only the courageous, only the visionary who determine the real nature of our struggle can possibly survive. So right there, only those who really persevere, who overcome this, can come together, can unite. Because think about it, you have other countries who may have faced this, And yet, if they overcome this, they can also be united with the Cubans, with the United States who were involved with this. And then, third, our last claim is that communism can and will lead to nuclear war. This is a scare tactic that President Kennedy uses in this to show, hey, if we don't do something, this is going to happen. This is a real fear that we can have. And he claims it's clear than ever that we face a relentless struggle in every corner of the globe that goes beyond the clash of armies of even nuclear armadas. So, right there, he's claiming that if we continue to go down this path, if we continue to be separate, if we continue to let communism in our world, it will lead to these different issues, to these different wars. And at this time, this is when the nuclear wars were really gaining not support, but they were really flourishing. They were thriving at this point because it was such new technology. It's why it's called the Cold War. And then our second piece of evidence to support this claim is that they serve primarily as a shield behind which subversion, infiltration, and host of other tactics steadily advance. So because you have this fear of war, someone else's agenda can be pushed forward, and it picks off those areas that are not as strong. Okay, so throughout this entire speech, we learn that President Kennedy is arguing that the United States, even though, yes, they did fail, we learned so much from this. We learned how communism was bad and how we needed to go ahead and eradicate this and change this for the better.